Welcome to The Third Story. I'm your host, Leo Sidran. Today's conversation features Donald Fagen. It almost seems like from the day I started this podcast, the kinds of people that I chose to talk to, there was kind of a feeling that inevitably I was leading to this conversation. Donald Fagen looms large for me and has been an influence, an inspiration, and along with his band Steely Dan, has kind of created, it's not a genre exactly, but as he says in our conversation, an attitude around music and production, aesthetics, songwriting that bring together what are often considered to be disparate elements. First of all, there's a deep literary influence in the songwriting. There's also an intense love and admiration of jazz, big band jazz, bebop, the stylists of the 50s, but that is married with a sophisticated and, for its time, very modern, contemporary, and hip record production approach. Steely Dan became known in the 70s as the kind of gold standard for record production. Albums like Asia and Gaucho and later Donald Fagen's solo records, The Nightfly and Kamakiriad, became references for anybody serious about making great-sounding records. The way they worked with studio musicians and arrangers, the whole approach was unique and singular, and at the same time managed to infiltrate and influence generations of record makers and songwriters. At least that's how I see it. I remember when I was growing up, driving the car next to my father, there would always be an album that he was getting into. It wasn't like he would change the CD every day or every week. If he was into an album, we would be listening to that for a season, maybe even a year. I remember particularly the summer of 1993 when Donald Fagen's second solo album, Kamakiriad, came out. I remember I spent that summer living in Spain, and I remember being driven to the airport by my parents, and we were listening to Donald Fagen's Kamakiriad. And I remember 2 months later when I came home from that trip, getting picked up, sitting back in the car, turning on the radio, and guess what was playing? Still Kamakiriad. We lived with that album for a year. We lived in it so long, we were singing the solos. We were singing along with the percussion fills, you know what I mean? And I'm not going to tell you that I'm a total expert, but I will say that I have spent plenty of time banging around inside of the world of Steely Dan, and in fact, maybe more inside of the world of Donald Fagen's solo records. This is a long time coming for me. And it's possible that this is your first time here at The Third Story, because if you're a fan, one of those fans who really digs on the stories and is already familiar with Donald, then this could be the kind of thing you've come to on your own. And if that's the case, then I welcome you, and I encourage you to check out third-story.com, where you can see and hear the archive, which includes interviews with contemporaries of Donald's, various members of his creative team, people who have come in and out of his world over the years, and it also includes conversations with musical people, songwriters, producers, that kind of thing, but also writers, essayists, the occasional scientist, political people, technologists, innovators. It's broad, but it's coherent. You'll hear it. There's a thread that runs through the whole thing. But of course, it's possible that you've been with me the whole time, in which case I think you know that this is a big deal today. I do need to just set the stage. In case you don't know, when we talk about Walter, and we do speak about him quite a bit, Donald speaks about Walter quite a bit. He's talking about Walter Becker. That's his longtime partner who passed away in 2017. We also talk about his book, Eminent Hipsters, that came out, maybe 6 years ago. It was a kind of a memoir, although it was really a collection of essays that he wrote, and it included a tour diary that he kept while he was on the road with another project that he had called The Dukes of September. That was a group that he put together with Boz Scaggs and Michael McDonald. And what else, man? I don't know. I'm just delighted to share this conversation with you, because you'll hear it's very open. It's very freewheeling. It just felt like a couple of cats hanging out, which is what we were. And we were hanging out at my friend John Scrapper Snyder's studio, Storefront Music, in Midtown Manhattan. I want to thank Scrapper and his partner Adam Elk for having us, hosting us, giving us a safe space to meet in the Midtown heat. Thank you for that, boys. I couldn't have done that without you. If you are so moved after you hear this episode that you can't contain yourself and you're not sure what to do, you want to do something, the place to go is patreon.com/thirdstorypodcast. That's where you can put your money where your mouth is and support this project. And if nothing else, spread the word. Tell your friends. Let it be known that you enjoyed this episode and that you enjoy this podcast. Share it. If you care, share. Also, as usual, I have prepared a Spotify playlist, some YouTube videos, curated a little area on the website for this episode where you can hear some of the songs that we talk about during the conversation, not only of Donald's and Steely Dan's, but also some of the artists and songs that he refers to in the conversation. So that's it. Without further ado, my conversation with Donald Fagen. So, Donald, we're talking today as you prepare for one of what have become an annual series of tours.
That's right.
The first part of your career, you spent a long time not touring, actively not touring, and now you spend a lot of time on the road.
Yeah, well, we toured from 1972 through 74 with our original band. Walter and I felt that it was taking time away from recording, and we were making less than $0. And there were various other reasons. There was a host of reasons why we decided to stop. And then we just paid attention to recording for the most part. And then in 93, there was an opportunity to start again, and so we did.
And what does it feel like to you now? What does performing mean to you now?
Well, I don't have the kind of anxiety I used to have about performing, and I think I'm singing better than I used to. And we're able now to handpick musicians who we've found to be sympathetic to what we're doing.
What does that mean?
Well, I think with the original band, they were great, very energetic, and we were all kids, really. But some of the guys weren't stylistically what we were looking for, and there were some, various vices that were involved that were obstacles to giving a really great performance, we felt. And now, we've got guys who are basically have a lot of experience, jazz musicians and session musicians. Actually, all the guys are really competent jazz people who can improvise over changes and all that. And and we kind of all feel the groove the same way. Mm-hmm. It took a long time to get the right group of guys, but now we've been together quite a long time. 15, 20 years or something.
Yeah. You and Walter had an idea of what you were looking for. I always wondered if you talked about it and how you would talk about it, because a lot of the stories I've heard from session players and people who were involved in the records describe a feeling of almost like a two-headed entity that was thinking along the same lines.
Yeah, in a way. Walter and I had very similar tastes. We were both kiddie jazz fans, which was very unusual at the time. Still is, I guess. And we also liked R&B and Motown and a few other groups that were big when we were in high school, like the Byrds and the Beatles and so on. And we agreed we need guys who could do a lot of those things well. I remember when we started back in the late 60s and early 70s, generally speaking, you could, a musician would either be a jazz musician who could improvise well and had all those skills, or who couldn't necessarily play rock and roll or electric blues that well. Especially drummers. There were exceptions, but most of them weren't great groove drummers, backbeat drummers. Mm-hmm. And so you would either get one or the other, and then the skills they didn't have were lacking. It just wasn't working. But by the mid-'70s, actually, there were musicians whose schooling was different and who could cover all these different genres and so on, and it was just natural to them. Plus, like a lot of the guys in our band, listened to us, when they were growing up.
Huh.
That's what they tell me, anyway.
So maybe that's what you needed, was just to stick around long enough that you could actually influence a generation of players.
Maybe so. Generally I've had a really good time. When you get older, your body hurts and your foot falls off and you have to pick it up. And so you become crankier when you get older. You're eating rotten food. And
yeah.
It's like, it's hard traveling and all. But musically, it's been great with the band. And, we get sold out performances. We were just like in Las Vegas, which was a horrible, horrible place to stay for 3 weeks.
You stayed 3 straight weeks.
Yeah, it was what they in a very flattering way, they called it a residency, as if you were like a professor or something like that. But the shows were great. It was a lot of fun, just like any other show. But
You stay in a hotel for 3 weeks or in an apartment?
yeah, it's like, especially like, when I like wander around outside, I'll get nailed by fans and stuff because I'm staying in the same hotel where I'm playing. So, it's like, because it's free, because it would be really expensive to stay in some other hotel. So, I don't go out that much. So you have to entertain yourself, reading and watching movies, or I find it very hard to write on the road, so usually I don't.
You talk about being like recognized on the street. I mean, do you get recognized on the street?
Much more in the last couple of years. I don't know why exactly. I used to be completely fan-free on the street for most of my career, but if you can call it a career. But in the last 4 or 5 years, like almost every day someone comes up to me. It surprised me because we never did television, hardly ever. And I don't know. Maybe because we play at the Beacon every year or something like that. I don't know.
Well, and also being touring, right? I mean, when you weren't touring, you were kind of mysterious, right? Your face wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, people say, "Oh, I saw you in Madison. I saw you in Lincoln, Nebraska." So it's we've been out so long, I guess that we have a lot of fans of different ages.
And how do you feel about being somebody who's recognizable like that? Does it feel invasive?
It depends, how I feel. If I'm in a bad mood, it's annoying, and if I'm in a better mood, it's kind of, oh yeah, sure, I'm great,
Yeah. Well, I think that you have not only fans but fanatics. I mean, there are Steely Dan fanatics.
Some fanatics, yeah.
Which I think must be a very strange thing to make work that inspires a kind of cult following and also fanaticism.
Well, I think people, appreciate it on different levels.
Yeah.
Some people just like the melodies and the vibe of it, and then other people they analyze it more thoroughly. And some of them are very wrong, but that's not my problem.
Right. Well, that's the thing, right? You put it out there in the world, and it's not your responsibility.
Nah. You shoot an arrow in the air. Where it falls, I know not where.
How long do you think you're going to keep doing it?
Well, I like to play. I feel weird if I'm not doing musical stuff. I play the piano a lot at home, and sometimes I play in... if we're not touring with the band, like I went out with the smaller group, the Night Flyers, for a couple months. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And there were younger guys, so it was interesting to see the way they see it.
In what sense?
Well, they just, they have to play their parts, but they have it just feels different. It's like, it's just as good in a certain way. But for one thing, with some smaller groups, so there's more space.
Mm-hmm.
And the drummer, who was really good, this guy Lee, had a more jazzy kind of approach, and I liked that. It was fun to play with him.
These were like Woodstock guys, right?
Yeah, they're from upstate, around Woodstock. Actually, Lee's father owns a jazz club in, I think it's Marlboro, New York.
Mm-hmm.
So he has a lot of experience. And then sometimes he'll play just up in Woodstock, where I have a house. There's, I used to play when Lee Von Helm was alive. He used to have these Saturday night rambles. Mm-hmm. So I used to sit in with those sometimes, and that was terrific fun.
Yeah.
And his daughter, Amy Helm, who is my stepdaughter, also I'll play with her and various people that she knows.
But in terms of going out every year, I mean, like I said, it seems like now you're in a cycle where every summer or fall, you're going to play the Beacon, you're going to go out and do a few weeks at least.
It's really, I look forward to it.
You do?
It's really fun. It's like a, kind of a onerous vacation or something.
And what do you listen to? If you're going to put on the box at home, what do you put on?
Charlie Parker relaxes me. I can put that on softly to go to sleep. I don't know. It's funny.
You use music to fall asleep, huh?
Yeah. And most people, still to this day, Charlie Parker's so radical that he can still clear a room at a party. Someone puts it on. But to me, it's like just so sweet, like bebop is so sweet. Like the whole, on one hand, it was like really the first instance of black musicians not catering to the audience. Dizzy Gillespie was sort of more of a liaison to the audience, but Charlie Parker just played. That's all he did. And
does you see the video of him? He's just he's just standing.
Yeah, he stands there in a proper position and plays. But so there was definitely an anger there, and you can hear that too. But on the other hand, there was this kind of brotherly warmth about it that it was very, very sweet. The melodies are very warm, and I don't get bored because he played so fast and there were so many notes, and yet I think because they were based on standards or blues for the most part, he just put new melodies on top of it. It retained the warmth of Harold Arlen and Gershwin and whoever, even though he had these jagged lines that he was playing over. So to me, it's like the perfect music. It's a shame that that more people aren't aware of it even to this day. I mean, I think there was a few years, maybe 5 years or 6 years in the late 40s and 50s when you'll hear these old recordings of a Dizzy Gillespie big band, and they finish the tune and it sounds like a huge audience. It's like just astounding to me that could be so, because maybe in Europe or Japan that could happen, but certainly not here. It's still to this day, most people, you just mention the word jazz and, it's almost become a joke in the culture.
It is a joke in the culture. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's hard to understand that because I live so inside the jazz bubble and so many of my friends are jazz musicians.
But I see it on TV or there's this comedian who was on this show Portlandia.
Fred Armisen.
Yeah, this guy Fred Armisen. He did this routine where the whole beginning of it is like putting down jazz and saying how bad it is and irritating, and I'll never watch him again. I never want to see that guy again because you know why? Because he's an idiot.
I saw that same routine, and I'm a fan of his, and I thought, boy, this is really a misguided point of view.
Speak about tone deaf in both literal and in any other sense.
Yes.
It's I now despise the guy because that's just how I am.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to see the other part of him now that I heard that. And there's this other guy who makes movies. He made that movie of The Horrible Drum Teacher.
Yes, I totally agree.
Fuck that motherfucker.
Boy, because he did two of them.
Then La La Land looks like white people invented jazz or whatever.
And I said about Whiplash, I thought if it was the same movie about basketball or something, I would have an easier time understanding it, or anything. I mean, it's really just a bad psychological thriller with the teacher, but he chose to use jazz as the vehicle.
Well, the funny thing is he doesn't even know what jazz is, because what they were actually teaching was a kind of stage band student jazz,
Well,
which is also very misguided in a lot of ways. And so he doesn't even know what it is, and yet he's making movies about it. It's disgusting. He's just he must be really dumb.
Man, I hate that you're saying what I think deep inside my body I feel, but I'm too wary of conflict to actually say these things, man.
I've written about it even.
Yeah.
I just think the guy. I remember I wrote something about it in Rolling Stone where I thought that movie Whiplash. Yeah. It's not that it shouldn't be shown in theaters, but it should be shown at midnight. In a midnight movie with other campy bad movies.
Yes, right. It is misguided, but you're right. Jazz is a joke. I mean, it has become a joke, but it's low hanging fruit. I mean, that's what I think about with Fred Armisen is I don't hold it against him because he doesn't know what he's talking about, and it's just
I do. I hold it against him that he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. There you go.
And it's just that this is something I love. It's true that most of the stuff I love happened before 1966 or something, so that what people think of as jazz, is really not. So, and he's a younger guy, and, I'm sure he just doesn't have the experience. But I don't care. Fuck him.
But it's funny because, some people really think of you as a rock musician.
I think I sort of, I mean, I think of it actually more as an R&B player. But I remember Bob Duro. Well, I did something with him once, and he said, I've been trying to figure out what kind of piano player you are, and you know what? You're a blues player. I said, yeah, pretty much.
By the way, great Bob Duro impression, man.
Yeah. Yeah, he was great guy, great writer. Yeah, in that period of, I don't like a lot of singers, actually, but Mose Allison, I think your dad produced it, too. It was a great record, but...
a few of them, yeah, you did.
Blossom Dearie.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff the kind of singing is very understated kind of thing. I love what Dizzy Gillespie sang. I think there's a version of this song called Something in Your Smile by Anthony Newley. Mm-hmm. And he just kills it. It's just great.
Why do you say you don't like a lot of singers? What does that mean?
I don't like jazz singing I'm talking about. It's really just a personal thing. I don't much like scat singing. Something about the way the melodies are distorted. I'd rather hear Ray Charles sing something straight with little changes or, the soulful stuff in it. But I'm not like a big Sarah Vaughan fan, although she was, fabulous, singer. But and generally, I'm not the hugest Ella Fitzgerald fan either, even. But and there are some people that I like. I kind of like more, when someone plays the melody and just plays with it a little bit. Like I once saw Sonny Rollins at the Bottom Line, and he played "I'll Be Seeing You" for about an hour, sticking to the melody almost every chorus, and yet
he believes in that.
It was just so it was like going on this trip. It was just unbelievable what he did with it. He's the best. I'm in touch with him once in a while.
Oh, really?
Well, he lives up in Woodstock now, and I met him at a tribute to him at the Apollo Theater. There was it was after he stopped playing, I got his phone number, and so when I'm up there, I'll call him, ask him if he needs anything, or if he wants someone to bring him. So far, he's declined, but we have talks on the phone occasionally. Yeah, and he's just fantastic. Funny. He's like the old philosopher.
I mean, if you can crawl into the skin of a younger Donald Fagen to imagine that you would be, have a friendship with Sonny Rollins.
It's unbelievable to me that I've even never spoken to him. I feel that way meeting I've met Horace Silver. I've met, the Becker brothers, certainly. Woody Herman, and who actually made a record doing arrangements of some of our stuff. And these guys that I used to listen to, in school. So it's always amazing to me. Although, I never had this cult of the personality like people, admirers of Elvis or actors, Marlon Brando. I liked their work, and maybe I was even fanatical about some of their work and stuff, but I never had a thing where I completely wanted to meet them so much. And I'm really happy when I meet someone like Sonny who totally lives up to everything I know about him. But I was never into the sort of buy their T-shirts type of thing.
But there's that danger that they might disappoint you too.
That's true. That's maybe part of it. It's true. I'm mainly interested in the work, listening to it, and there's also a lot of jazz people, even jazz musicians, where I'll put on something that I think is great, or any of Miles, and they'll start talking between each other, talking about stories about Miles and the usual Miles stories or this or that, and I'm trying to listen to the record. It's like, to me, it's so magnetic, the music itself, that I just tend not to say much, or, maybe I'll say, hey, wow, listen to that or something. But they just start chattering over it as if, it makes me suspicious of them. Like, how much are they really into this? Or are they just musicians for hire who play anything that you might want? Or, but, that may also be narcissistic of me to think other people would have the same sort of concentration, that I have.
Well, but I hear what you're saying. The work speaks for itself, and I mean, maybe to an extent, you feel that way about your own work too.
I don't listen to my own work. But that's mainly because I'm so I don't like to hear my voice. I always hear the flaws in it.
What did you want to sound like, or who?
Billy Eckstine. I want that's a dated style and all that, but I wanted to have the kind of it's funny, but there's certain singers I admire who are not even jazz singers, like Julie Andrews.
Uh-huh.
I love the technique, and how, or even the singers that backup singers we have in our band are just fabulous singers, and I could never do what they do. It's just the accuracy and the range and all that kind of stuff. And I know I got a nice style and all that, but I always I love people with great technique.
You have a style. You have an original style, but you don't want to hear yourself sing. You still don't really want to hear the sound of yourself.
No, and there's something just also I feel exposed, or like when I finished mixing the Nightfly record, I had kind of a nervous breakdown because when I was writing with Walter, it was kind of a distance I could keep, and I was playing roles in a way, and but the Nightfly was like personal. It was like stuff that I was actually emotionally involved with as a kid and all that. And although it was a complete surprise to me, when I was finished with that, I didn't want it to come out. It was like I sort of like, I've made a terrible mistake, I think it came out good, but I don't want anyone to actually hear it, And I had like a nervous breakdown, really. I started going to a shrink. But now I'm better.
After the Nightfly, there was a period of a number of years where you were pretty...
Yeah, well, that had to do with that. Like, I just fell apart, and it took me like 10 years to get myself together, sort of. It was like... it was also one of these things where, being brought up in the conservative, conformist 50s, I... like my father, I was kind of emotionally stunted, like most of the 50s fathers, in those days. And, there was something, it just like, when I felt like I was exposing myself, I just lost it. And also, I think I had been running on this kind of youthful energy that didn't really... I didn't have the usual development into an adult, because I was also spoiled by the rock and roll business, and that if I'd go out on tour, you were taken care of, not very well, but it wasn't until I was in my 40s that I knew what a mortgage was. Or, I still don't know very well what a mortgage is, but I had to kind of grow up late.
Or what a marriage was.
Or what a marriage was, yeah, for sure. And I kind of, it wasn't until I was like almost middle-aged that I got it, because, when you go to a shrink, you have to go through all this, like, emotional stuff and get it out, get all that stuff out, that you've been ignoring all your life.
But you're saying that actually the process of making the Nightfly was sort of the trigger, the thing that...
Totally.
Putting yourself out there in a more personal way.
Yeah.
And if that's what you were doing for 10 years was... more or less was, or 8 years.
Yeah, and I would try to write every day, and I
Yeah.
just hated what I was writing. Like, I just throw it out, or...
Wow.
It was like, it was very frustrating. I got really depressed and all that. Started taking antidepressants, and mostly they didn't work, and yeah, it was a drag. The 80s, although, way in retrospect, I'm glad I set out the 80s, because nothing ever actually happened. And Ronald Reagan was president, and
So you just
and I hated that reverb they used to use.
Well, it's true. It's true, man, because when you came, you skipped it, and you came back, and you got to make another dry-sounding record.
Yeah, I
came back, it was still dry.
Reverb used to drive me nuts, yeah.
When you came back in the next record, the follow-up record and the follow-up songs that you were writing, they were like, rather than looking to the past, they were looking to kind of a version of the future that was being told from the 50s.
Yeah, exactly.
So you came back looking to the future. I mean, there's something very optimistic after having come through all that.
Well, especially Comic Curiad, I think. Nightfly was kind of looking at the present from the past, and then Comic Curiad was sort of looking at the future from the present in a certain way. And then the rest of the albums were just all about death.
And here we are. But when you sing, you do. Every time I've seen you sing, you go for it. I don't hear you.
Oh yeah, I've always been able to do that kind of. I'm scared to when I first get on the stage, but after a few minutes, I just get so into the music and the groove and all that I don't even know what I'm doing. It's just kind of natural, you know.
And you still feel that like kind of nervous adrenaline before you go on stage?
Yeah, not as much, but I think most people do who are, no matter how much experience you have, there's this kind of, I'm going to fuck it up. You know?
Maybe it's not that surprising to hear you say that there was something freaky about putting out a personal statement, because you are a bit of a mystery to people. I mean, I guess people don't necessarily know who you are.
Yeah, it's because we didn't like playing TV, because to an extent, and we didn't like being on camera, so there's not much documentary footage.
Why not?
Because I think both of us had, to a degree, a kind of shyness or kind of a physical diffidence, or thought we were like, wouldn't look good. We weren't the kind of, I don't think we didn't necessarily have a problem with the way we looked. We were just, but we felt it wouldn't look good on TV because of historically, the kind of people you see on TV. They have big heads, big like swaths of cheek, and white, even teeth, and we're just not that, like I remember seeing what's his name? He used to go on David Letterman. The guy who used to draw American Splendor, Harvey Pekar.
Oh yeah, right.
And he would come on TV, and it was like I would see him, and I'd like, I love this guy, but he shouldn't be on TV.
But there's something interesting. But also your records sounded so crafted, you know, and it's almost like you're saying we couldn't give you a visual version that was as crafted.
In a way, I think it was to a degree neurotic. There is one thing about TV that's the worst, which is on David Letterman a few times and all that, and it's the idea that you have to start exactly on a dime when they want to, and you have to end when they want to, and they're really nasty about that. The producers, because it's all about transitions and commercial now.
Yeah.
And I hate being. I feel like I'm. There's something fascist about it as it relates to music, and I hate that. I don't like working to somebody else's schedule. Or
As you've been on the road more, you've been in the studio a little less. Do you feel as connected to the studio as you did 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
Not at this point. For a variety of reasons, I enjoy playing live more than being in the studio at this point, which is kind of the opposite of the way I used to feel.
Yeah.
And also, it's possible that there's a new paradigm, for better or worse, that I do find it difficult. I found it difficult to write. I've a few things that I've been working on, but for one thing, I sometimes when I'm writing, I feel as if I'm repeating myself. I'll get I'll work for a day on something and say, hey, I wrote this already, pretty much. And that's uncomfortable for me. Or in the sort of climate we live today, both literally and also politically and socially, I feel I don't know enough about the culture. I mean, I've written a lot of songs from the viewpoint of an older person looking at the younger culture, but I've done that already, and I am kind of disconnected from the sort of millennial tech generation and the way they think. Because Walter and I used to sort of pride ourselves on being pretty good psychologists, and kind of like playwrights or something. Being very aware of the way people relate to each other, and that sort of went into the tunes. Now it's much more mysterious to me, and as far as I can see, much shallower, with exceptions. So it's harder for me to relate. I don't feel like I have that much wisdom to impart at this point.
It's interesting to hear you say that you've written songs from the point of view of an older person looking at the young culture, because I think a lot of those songs you wrote when you were a member of the younger culture.
Yeah, well, of course we were when we started, but as time went on, I think probably around the time we wrote Hey 19, we were kind of shifting into being adults or whatever,
Well, right. I mean, there's always been an element of nostalgia also in your writing.
There is. I don't swear much by nostalgia, but I think everyone, when they get older, they, remember, perhaps, with a lot of idealism, about days when they were a younger version of themselves. You know?
You talk about how the political climate is part of what has you feeling a little isolated or outside of the zeitgeist of the mainstream. Do you feel political now?
Well, I always was aware of what's, going on. Like a lot of kids in my generation, or at least my particular subculture, I was very aware of the Vietnam War and I hated Nixon along with everybody else and all that. But I guess I didn't see it so much as material for songs, and I still don't really to a degree. But the problem now is that the satirical element in our work has been far outstripped by reality. You can't really make fun of what's going on now that successfully. Satire is. I've spoken to other people, writers and so on, who basically write satire or parody. And for instance, the skits they have on Saturday Night Live, once in a while they hit it, but generally speaking, just what happens every day in the news is just so much more outrageous that, it seems kind of impotent.
You described the process of trying to write today for yourself. I assume anything that you wrote today would be for Donald Fagen. It would be a solo thing.
Aside from a few moments, I mainly collaborated with Walter. And I didn't even do that for some years before he died.
How did you, in the period when you were both managing Steely Dan and your solo career, how did you distinguish between the two sets of writing, the process?
Well, I've been asked that before, and generally speaking, my answer is, I think, the same. It's when I was writing with Walter, there was a kind of more objective or journalistic approach where I was often sort of the songs I'd be kind of playing a character in a way who was an observer or participant, and with solo albums there was some of that too, but it was more personal, more subjective. Sometimes I just wrote as myself, so that's the main difference, I think.
What about the difference between writing collaboratively and writing alone? Was there some comfort in having a sounding board, or was there something that generated
absolutely.
in that way?
Yeah, in fact, I sometimes even now when I write something, I turn around and say, "Hey, what do you think of this?" There's no answer.
You try to imagine what the response might be.
Yeah, and sometimes I can do that, but Walter was very articulate in the way that he would put things, so that I have to do that all by myself now. So
I saw you play last summer when I was home visiting my folks in Madison.
Oh,
I saw
okay.
Steely Dan Doobie Brothers gig
on
a hot June night. I wondered what it's like for you to be Steely Dan right now, and what the experience has been like for you since Walter passed.
It's not, what is Walter was ill for some years before he died, and his role, because of that, his role was somewhat diminished. So I was kind of running it by myself, and he'd show up for the occasional rehearsal, and but he was dealing with his physical problems a lot. So it's not that much of a transition, really, at this.
You write about in Eminent Hipsters, also in your tour diary, something that I've wondered about as a fan of both of your records, solo records, and of the Steely Dan records. Why, for some reason, if it's Steely Dan, you fill a big room, and if it's Donald Fagen, it's a different set of economics, when musically I find them to be very related.
Yeah, it's just a fact of familiarity, and people... It just Steely Dan has more recognition, and but if they come to see me, they're basically getting at something pretty similar. Although even now I've started doing with Steely Dan. I've started doing some more stuff for my solo albums and so on.
Is that something you would have done when Walter was still?
Walter had a thing about he liked to keep it within the sort of Steely Dan universe. He was very reluctant to do his own stuff, and he wasn't that happy when I did my own stuff too. I think when we first started playing again in the 90s, he was more into that. But as time went on, he wanted to do mainly Steely Dan material. And it didn't bother me that much, but I am glad now to be able to do a bigger variety of stuff. You know, when someone's ill, they tend to want more routine. You know, it's like, because I guess it's just less for them to deal with if you've got... So he liked to do a pretty similar set list every night. You know, we'd switch out some tunes, but, you know, I didn't want to... upset him or make it difficult for him, so I just went along with it. But, you know, since he died, I've tried to mix it up a little more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine that it gets a little routine playing the same tunes.
Well, I like playing them. It's like I could still do that, and we still do that some nights, play a sort of a hits set list. They're really fun to play. You know, it's like, because of the way it's set up, I myself have I'm sort of more of a free agent. Everyone else has to play their part, more or less, and it kind of leaves me to mess around in almost every song. So I sometimes feel like Count Basie or something, like just interjecting a chord here and there, trying to kick it or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks, I think, to the balance in the music that I feel like you've been striking for a long time, and that influence, like you described, the reason you like this band and these musicians that you found is because they go both ways. They understand jazz. They know what that is, even if it's a very part-heavy gig and a very arranged gig.
Well, there's a lot of soloing they do, too, which are improvised, but I'm just talking about the basic arrangement is made up of parts, each of which they have to play, more or less, you know, to make it groove. Like with any rhythm section, you know, I get to, you know, mess around.
But I want to talk about that tension in the music because, you know, I know you're a huge jazz fan. You know, I know that's really feeding the music.
Sure.
And it's also highly specific. I mean, the stories of making the records is really like the quest for a very particular specific thing in almost every case.
Well, yeah, as we started, you know, getting better at making records, we also started getting these ideas which are more specific. Originally, it was just the 5 or 6 guys in the band, and, you know, we let them do what they do, pretty much. But after a while, we started... we wanted to play around in a kind of almost postmodern sense with taking classic stuff and twisting it, you know. And if you're going to do that, you need to specify exactly what you want, because it's not just using old grooves or anything like that. It's you know, starting with an old groove and then seeing how you can alter it and seeing how, and when played against the lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get a very rich thing going, you know.
How much of it was looking for something and not being sure what it was?
There was some of that, too, you know. Yeah, we never knew exactly what we were going to get. And sometimes, you know, you'd ask a musician to do something that it was just so alien to him that we'd just say, let's go on to something else.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, there's that classic albums video of you and Walter putting up the multi-tracks to Peg.
Oh, yeah, right.
And
the Asia
thing.
Documentary or whatever.
And you're listening to all the solos, the guitar solos. It maybe gave me the best sense of what it was like to be in the studio with the two of you, because there you are again, 20-something years later, 30 years later, listening to all those solos and reacting again as if for the first time.
Yeah, it had the same effect. It's like, you know, I guess Walter and we just had very similar tastes, so that we knew when something was quality performance, you know, and all the solos had moments that were good, and you know, they were all great musicians. But we were actually, I remember in that particular clip where we're listening to Peg or whatever, it's basically a blues, but we were surprised that we went through 4 or 5 players who just couldn't negotiate it for some reason. I think it was mainly, I mean, it was a major key blues for one thing, although you could play blues scale over most of it. But it had, I think, it's basically a 1-4-5 blues, but the 5 chord was parallel to the other chords in that it was also had a major 7th in it, which meant that it was a Lydian. It went into a Lydian mode, which some guys just couldn't wrap their head around it for some reason.
Yeah, it was befuddling.
Yeah. We were surprised, though. And you know what it is? I think Jay Graydon, who ended up doing the actual solo, he had more of a bebop-y sensibility, and that really helped.
how many great solos ended up on the cutting room floor of those records? How many great performances?
Not Peg, that was a specific instance where he went through quite a few guys, but I can't remember another one where we didn't get past 2 guys.
Yeah.
There were some really heartbreakers. Like, I remember we had Charlie Mariano come in, great, fantastic alto player. And it was when he was, older. He was an older guy by that time. It was in a key that wasn't that happily applied, to jazz. And it was okay, but you could see he was like a little he had been playing like modal music for some time by then. He was a little rusty as far as changes goes. So then we just couldn't use it. And so we ended up having Randy Becker come in and play it on the trumpet or flugelhorn or whatever.
I've talked to, for these interviews, I talked to Rob Mounsey, I talked to Steve Kahn, I talked to some folks who were on some of the records, and they both told me a version of a story of recording the rhythm track for Gaucho, doing, I don't know how many takes of the thing, and being somewhat exasperated, and finally realizing that there was the last take of the night or something. It was salvaged, but the way they described it was almost a bewilderment of what you guys were looking for. They couldn't even necessarily hear the difference between the takes, but they were getting this feedback that, nope, we're not quite there. There's still a thing.
That was an interesting one, because what actually happened was we did like, 8, 10 takes, and it was a difficult song. It had, a lot of accents, and the chorus was kind of a different style from the rest of it. And then Walter and I said, let's, it was getting late.
Yes.
And Walter and I left. And what happened was our producer, Gary Katz, decided he wanted to try himself to do more takes. And so I have no idea what happened after that, although I've heard they did a lot of takes. And they ended up doing the last take and then used some few pieces from some other takes or what, and it came out good.
Yes.
I have to say that I was very ambivalent to actually record that, because I felt that it drew too heavily from a Keith Jarrett composition that I had heard. And I hadn't heard the Keith Jarrett thing for a long time, but I know it was kind of in my head when I was writing it. And so I was always thinking, maybe, it was almost like a parody of Keith Jarrett in a certain way. But I sort of, I said, it's probably just as well we don't get a take, because, I don't like to be a repeater pencil, as Lester Young used to say. But when we got a good take, everyone said, it's great, let's just finish it. And so we did. And then Keith Jarrett sued us when it came out.
Is that true?
Absolutely.
Oh, so your intuition was right on that.
I think, yeah. It's like I think I was the one who was more careful about it, but I just didn't follow through.
That's funny. I was not expecting that to be the tag on the story.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me when I read your book and thinking about the Kamakiriad, some of the other writing of yours, is the role of science fiction in your development.
Right.
When I was a young man, I guess, in high school, my dad gave me this Alfred Bester book that I think was called Tiger, Tiger, the version that I read.
Wow, you're one of the few people who's familiar with that.
And I remember being given this book like it was this holy, hip, thing that he was giving me. And I called him after I read your book, and I said, man, Donald is totally into that book too, man.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Science fiction was influential, significant to you.
Yeah. I used to read a lot of, I guess what they now call golden age science fiction. And he was probably my favorite, and Walter's too, because, I don't know, we just grew up in the same kind of subculture, and we both were sci-fi fans, and we both were familiar with Alfred Bester. And I always felt that there was something about, he had a kind of very cosmopolitan attitude. He was funny, and he had a kind of postmodern sensibility almost about the whole thing. I always felt there was something about his attitude and the kind of distance he had from what was going on that we somehow incorporated into the whole Steely Dan thing.
I know you've talked about this before, but I've always been curious about how the literary side of your life influenced and influences your writing, how you would think about writing lyrics as if they were stories.
Yeah, well, both Walter and I were, used to read a lot when we were kids, and, we read the stuff that was popular with East Coast middle-class kids at the time, so it was The Catcher in the Rye, and we both liked humor, like comic novels.
Mm-hmm.
So we both enjoyed Kurt Vonnegut and Thomas Berger, Vladimir Nabokov, although he was on a kind of a higher level in a certain way because his books were richer in a sense, or more complex. There was a few others. Well, Philip Roth, to a certain extent. Bruce J. Friedman, I think, had a big influence on both this. The way his comedy technique, which had a kind of it was really Jewish, but it was a kind of outrageous, kind of shock humor. And he was very brave to, psychologically, he was brave about depicting certain kind of characters.
How much of your point of view lyrically do you think is Jewish, is really Jewish?
There's certainly an element of it. Walter wasn't Jewish, but he grew up in Forest Hills, so he always used to think of himself as kind of an honorary Jew. And so his humor was influenced by the environment. He grew up in high school kids. He went to Stuyvesant.
But in terms of your, I know you described this sort of alienation, that suburban alienation that you felt when you moved, but there was something also that felt very kind of connected to the Jewish middle class experience of that generation, moving out to the suburbs and being...
Yeah, and it was very negative experience for me because, my parents, in order to, make a better life for the family and become upwardly mobile and so on, moved out of the sort of inner city of Passaic, New Jersey. When I was I was born in Passaic, then we moved to Fairlawn for a couple of years, but then we moved to this brand new development, Levittown type place in New Jersey that was built on farmland, and all the houses looked the same, and we were moving away from our sort of broader family, away from my grandmothers and my aunts and so on. And it's true, my father got a much better job in this place, but it never seemed worth it to me. It seemed like, I think that's when I really I was about 10 or 11. I think that's when I really separated from my parents because it seemed like they were making a really terrible decision. And I felt that I knew better than them what was important in a way, which was family and...
That's interesting because on the one hand, you knew what was important, and what was important was family and being connected. And on the other hand, it seems like almost a precursor for what would happen later on in the late 60s when your entire generation started to believe that they knew better than the generation that was older.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it was justified. Although it ended up in a kind of disaster.
Yes. Well, here we are. But, there's something so vivid in the writing of The Nightfly, for example, in New Frontier, that I think must be a direct result of having felt that isolation, that suburban isolation.
That really had a lot to do to this very sterile environment that we moved into, and it sort of, wish to escape is all through that record,
So if nothing else, it was worth it for a couple of good tunes.
Yeah. I don't know if it was really worth it, but I did get some good stuff out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Who knows what you would have gotten out of a happier pre-adolescent
that's true.
life. I read that you went to the Newport Jazz Festival when you were 11 years old.
Yeah, my older cousins were jazz fans, and my cousin Jack and Mike, and they took me. We actually hitched there from New Jersey to Newport, and I remember seeing a couple of shows, Howard McGee and a few other things. It was a little disappointing because it was drizzly those days, and we had sleeping bags and slept on the beach, and it was kind of grotty, but it was still fun for me, because I was a kid and I was deeply into jazz at that point.
You were already into jazz at that point?
Yeah, from about 10, I think, or 11, I started really getting into it.
What'd you dig?
Well, I think those same cousins, and also I had this cousin Barbara. She was really good looking. She was maybe 18 around this time, and she was a big jazz fan and used to go to the Village all the time. She used to date beatniks. And she also went out with Miles Davis briefly and knew Thelonious Monk quite well.
What was her last name?
Her last name was Barbara Cohn.
Uh-huh.
She was a great dancer, I remember. And she had this record collection in the basement, of really good stuff. I remember, the record with Thelonious Monk and Johnny Griffin, a live record, and all kinds of great stuff. We used to have this family sort of celebration every year, and we spent most of it in the basement with Barbara listening to these records. And so when I started listening to these radio shows that you could receive from Manhattan, Symphony Sid and Mort Figa, and people like that, and I put the radio under the covers, and I was into, well, first I think because my cousins liked it, I was into like Brubeck, mostly because of Paul Desmond. I always thought Brubeck was well-intentioned, but very stiff.
The hipster's lament is to always make it clear that I dig Brubeck, but really it's Paul Desmond.
Yeah, I mean, Brubeck was a great writer, I think. He wrote some great jazz tunes, which are standards now, but his solos used to start out good, but then something would happen where he'd start just like banging, and his time would go, and it was really a relief when Paul Desmond would start to play. But then after listening to the radio and getting more of a sense of what was out there, I kind of centered in on Miles Davis' first quintet, and and I used to try to imitate Red Garland. And I love Coltrane, although it scared me it was actually scary sounding, like on those Prestige records. He sounded, kind of angry, and I'm sure he was to a certain degree. But it was his searching quality. I actually liked those better than when he developed into a different kind of player. He was basically a hard bop player, but you could hear him trying to find other notes that no one used,
I wonder also about the context. I mean, if he was the sort of wild card in the context of that quintet, it still seemed like it was contained in the same package
Yeah, it was perfect, because Miles played great solos too, but it was more, his note choice was more conventional. He was, I think, glad to stop playing so fast like he used to have to with Charlie Parker.
That's right.
And so he developed this very melodic style. His time was perfect, man. He had such a groove, Miles. But then when Coltrane would come on and he'd play, all these notes, it was like, it was a great, Miles was a great foil for Coltrane, And then Red Garland had this kind of style that, people used to make fun of him because it sounded like a cocktail pianist. But to me, it was just, he had a light touch, but he was a really good improviser, and he had amazing technique. I mean, he had a warmth to his playing and a groove that no other piano player ever achieved, I think.
So he was your guy?
Yeah, for sure. And Philly Joe Jones.
Yeah, sure. Hearing you describe, first of all, being kind of turned on to jazz, in part because you had this hip, beautiful cousin.
Right.
And wanting to kind of be around her, it sounds like.
Yeah, she was great. She was funny.
I can't help but wonder if the sort of image of Cousin Dupree comes from having been attracted to an older cousin.
Oh, I never thought of that, but it's an interesting idea.
But then also the radio, and not being in New York and wanting to be in an urban center and listening to the radio, what that must have represented to you under the covers. Like there's some hip shit happening.
Yeah, totally. And I remember also I used to listen to Gene Shepard, who was a monologist. He was the greatest talker of all time, and he used to tell stories. He was on 11:15 to midnight when I was listening to him. My Uncle Dave actually put me on. He was kind of a hipster too, and he put me on to listening to Shepard. Shepard used to call his listeners the gang. He said, "Hey gang, send me those articles if you see something that's really like out there in the newspaper, whatever. Send it in, and if it's interesting to me, I'll read it." So he called them straws in the wind. That being they were things that enabled you to be prescient about what was going to happen in the future. So I once found this article in a local paper. It was some guy in the middle of the night went down to the new shopping center and threw Coke bottles through all the windows, and broke every window in the shopping center. So I sent it in to Shepard, and he actually read it on the air. Right? He says, "This kid sent me this," and it was so exciting, that I remember going down to my parents who were watching Bonanza or something. on TV, and I said, "Wow, Shepard just," and they didn't get it. It was like, "Oh, that's nice," you know. It's like, but to me, it was great because I had connected with some hip guy, you know.
Right. It was a sign that you could be one of these guys.
Yeah. Well, at least have some connection with a bigger world beyond the one I was in. Yeah.
What did your parents make of your decision to be a musician?
Well, my mother, was a singer. She was a child singer. She was kind of like Shirley Temple, only she only played in the Catskills. There was this hotel called The Ideal, and her mother knew the guy who owned this hotel, which later expanded into being the Concord Hotel. But the guy loved my mother's singing, and so every summer from when she was 5 to about 15, she'd go up there and sing for tips with a trio, And so, especially my mother, she loved music, so she was not that upset about it. My father was great. He was sort of not that controlling or anything like that. I don't think he got it really, but and he was especially happy when we started making money. And he used to wear a Steely Dan hat and talk to fans when they went on vacation and all that. So they were pretty happy about it.
So your parents, they appreciated it when you started making money, especially your father. What about you? Did you expect to make money? Was that an expectation? Was that a hope? Was that an ambition?
Well, I just I think I wanted to make a living doing music because it was the only thing we were interested in. And then we also, at the same time, I think we're fairly arrogant, and we thought that if we really worked at it, some people had to like it, what we were doing. That may have been just, arrogance on our part, and yet it worked out.
You think it was simply arrogance? Because in a way, it is a kind of an unlikely success story.
Yeah,
to be putting that much jazz, that much sophistication. There's so many quirks about the way you wrote.
I guess, at the time, the FM radio was still happening where you could actually, there was a lot of weird stuff on the radio. You could, there was you could still have a hit with a movie instrumental or, there was some weird instrumental stuff that could still be hits. And that closed up pretty quickly. But at the time, because of that, we felt that because we knew we were doing something different, and that we knew more chords than most of the other guys, that it was going to be different sounding. So we felt we had a chance, because of the formats at that time.
So in the sense, the fact that you were so different maybe gave you an edge, you were thinking.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. Because, I don't think my voice is that great or anything like that. It's, okay, but I think we were really into arranging. It's like we both like big bands as well as small groups. We were both Duke Ellington fans, particularly. I used to force my parents to take me to Lambertville or one of these places and see Stan Kenton. I saw Stan Kenton when he had his Mellophonium band. I saw Maynard Ferguson at the top of his game, and I saw Ellington. I saw Count Basie.
The big band model was actually really informing the way you thought about it.
Yeah, the section work and how they developed a piece, which was sort of almost like a classical model where, they started with the theme and then they'd have these episodes, they'd change key. I mean, if you listen to those records now, the best of them really sound good. They'd always have an introduction that someone put some thought to. Then they'd play the tune instrumentally, and then they'd change key usually, and then you'd hear this vocalist come in near the end of the tune for the first time and sing the song, and then they'd wrap it up, or a really cool format,
I get the sense that it was the literature that influenced your lyrics. Were there songwriters or lyricists that were also influential to you or meaningful to you when you started writing songs?
Well, Walter and I were both familiar with standards, me especially through my mother, who used to sing them at home all the time. So I wasn't the kind of player who could play a party and take requests so much, but I knew a fair amount of standards, and I really liked Gershwin, and I loved Harry Warren, who was he wrote these very simple songs, but they were like perfect. Burton Lane and Harold Arlen, And then both Walter and I had really got into the Motown people who were writing those tunes, and also like, Burt Bacharach.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound, in context now it may just sound like easy listening music, but at the time he was doing these kind of Frenchified chord progressions that no one else would do, and then adding these soul sisters, sing it. It just was perfect. And we both like Frank Zappa,
mm-hmm.
who was chaotic but very clever, and then Laura Nero,
mm-hmm.
who also was doing, brought in some sort of Bartok-like harmony, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put that together with Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters, it ends up sounding a little bit like us,
I mean, I hear you saying again and again that you knew that there was something unique about it.
Yeah.
And as we started out talking about the band that you found now, you mentioned that they were, many of them, influenced by
mm-hmm.
the band.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you make of the influence today of Steely Dan?
That I don't really know, because I haven't been listening to a lot of newer bands, and it always seems to me that I would hear more of an influence on TV jingles, like in the 80s and 90s. Like, there were some things that sounded a lot like us, because the arrangers dug it.
Yeah, they were probably calling a lot of the same people.
Yeah, so, you'd hear, I don't know, commercial for some car or something, and I'd go, hey, didn't they just rip something from the middle of so-and-so,
Yeah.
And as far as bands who were influenced, there's a few of them, obviously, and I have to say I've never really heard one that I could say, that's a direct sort of link. Or
I wonder if more than a specific link of a band or a writer that is lifting from you, it's more like a set of values,
Well, maybe an attitude.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, not musically so much, but just in our attitude. And what we were doing was some weird version of punk, in a certain way, because it was because of the satirical kind of element in punk of just kind of ripping everything apart. And I mean, it was funny just because it was so awful. In a lot of cases, it made it funny, and. Although we were always reluctant to, we were just controlled. I mean,
well, that's why I think it's surprising to hear you say punk, because the association is much more.
Yeah, but
about
I think
control.
sort of the objective was similar in a funny way.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times when people talk about, especially the sort of the later Gaucho Asia, there's a real sense of studio control and looking for something. I mean, it was before drum machines,
right?
But you guys were looking to be like really tight, real tight.
Yeah, we wanted to be tight. We just wanted the tightness of any black R&B group or Ray Charles record. Or it was not that weird. It was just in the jazz world or the James Brown or whatever. The standard of tightness and groove and consistency was just that's what it was.
Yes.
If you had bad time, you were fired.
Yes.
If you couldn't play your part, you were fired, So we like to use guys who we wouldn't have to say much to them. They would just be able to do it,
Yes.
I like dance grooves, I don't really dance, but I love it, Dance grooves they have now, I don't get at all. Some hip-hop stuff, like especially in the 80s and 90s, that managed to manufacture extremely nice grooves, although I don't hear that so much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think, we were among the first to start experimenting with drum machines and sequencers.
Yeah, was there not a sequencer built for your first solo record?
It was actually built for Gaucho, the last Steely Dan album in the 70s.
Yeah.
But Roger Nichols developed it more by the time I made the Nightfly record. So, after a while I became impatient with it because... you would spend so much time trying to master the technology that it didn't leave you time to write songs. And it was like which is, I think, the state that we're in now. People just mess around with the technology and kind of paste the song on top of it, But what we were interested in was getting great grooves that we couldn't achieve with the band sometimes. It was really out of desperation. Like this Wendell machine, Roger Nichols. I used to call it the desperation machine. That's when we would use it,
when we save me, help me.
Yeah.
There's a story that I heard, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, about a night spent in the studio with some digital delay box trying to move a snare drum or a hi-hat X number of milliseconds one direction or the other direction.
Yeah, no, when we, what it was is that was sort of when I was trying to write at home. I had a bunch of digital delays. I had a delay on every track. And I used to experiment with, moving stuff, and I got pretty good at it. And when we were recording like Nightfly, and later on doing like Comic Hyriad, and also Two Against Nature, I by then I was able to, I could tell the difference, between moving things a tenth of a millisecond. And I'm sorry I'd have to admit that, because it was really monotonous work and soul-killing to a certain extent. But if you'd hit that spot moving things around, all of a sudden it was like magic when it would pop into like sounding like an actual drummer who was perfect.
Have you heard this groove? There's this new groove where the hi-hat is pushed against the kick and the snare, and it's like D'Angelo, hip-hop related, but there are jazz musicians, Robert Glasper, piano player, are associated with it, and it's a groove that I find to be a real generational divide between whether or not people can feel it and dig it or not.
Well, I think stuff that used to sound just wrong is now desirable. You hear things that sound totally crippled that people, build a record around. That to me it's funny, but it's a one joke thing for me. It's like if you hear 8 bars of it, now can you play good? You know?
Right.
I have the same problem with a lot of humor novels in that sense, and TV shows and things where the attitude is so arch that it becomes boring. Or there's a lot of films like comedy films that they're just based around this one joke, or one idea that's supposed to be funny, but it's just like you just see it, and that's something I didn't want to get into with Steely Dan, and Walter didn't either. It was this kind of, I think I was a problem with Frank Zappa to a certain extent, especially as he got older. Is he just had these one joke ideas and fill up the rest of the song with music and lyrics that was basically just repeating the same joke, and I never was into that really.
But again, it feels like maybe it's the context. I mean, it's radical to be satirical in an unexpected context, like you're still writing tunes that they're so grooved and they feel so good.
Yeah, we always wanted to have the music, and we want to make fun records, but I think just because we were both big readers, we were always interested in subtly satirizing something, or just doing it in one line in the song that would change the whole thing, and especially taking a certain kind of lyric and putting it against music that was totally, seemed to belie what the lyrics were saying, although and that was almost in a sort of Brechtian kind of way,
Well, it's subversive. I mean, I can't help but think about that. The audience that I saw out to hear you play last June in Madison, and I'm from Madison. I have nothing just negative to say about my hometown. But these are some old school rockers who went out to have a good party and check out a Steely Dan concert. And there's something quite subversive about the amount of hipness in the lyrics and in the music.
There's no way for us to control how people receive what we're doing, but I think there is that kind of Brechtian thing happening where you can have a very sweet music that is basically masking some horrible thought.
And you feel like that's you got some of that over.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, like, for instance, there's a lot of people who are not fans and they object to it. I think because they just hear the surface of it, and like something to them it sounds like Muzak or sometimes, or just soft rock or easy listening rock or something, and they associate rebelliousness with just this kind of loud hard rock stuff or heavy metal or whatever. And to me, that's a very adolescent way of being rebellious. It's kind of dumb. And we always, wanted to have a lot of nuance in the thing,
I will forever remember you telling me today that you feel that you have more in common with punk.
More in common with them than with, sort of California singer-songwriter type stuff, confessional stuff, some of which I love, like James Taylor
Sure.
or Crosby, Stills, Nash, or whatever. I love those records, but it's not what we do.
Well, you get kind of lumped in today in a world that is sometimes referred to as yacht rock.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're
I
describing.
think that's funny. In fact, we once invited the yacht rock guy who invented yacht rock to a show.
Yeah.
And I think Mike McDonald was along on that show, and we came out. We got these yachting caps that we all wore, and the guy was just freaked out that we actually had a sense of humor about ourselves. Really,
Yeah, right.
It was very funny.
Do you know about this whole subset of Steely Dan cover bands around the world?
I know there's many of them. I don't think I've ever heard one, but I know there's a lot of them.
And what do you make of that?
Well, it's very flattering, I think. They certainly, if people are doing it pretty well, they have to have a certain amount of musical education and chops and everything, so they must be pretty good,
Yeah.
I know I wouldn't be interested in doing that if some other group. I mean, for instance, a few years ago, I had some rehearsals with some of the guys in our band, and the idea was to take early Rolling Stone stuff and do it as sort of Ramsey Lewis or Ray Bryant type trio stuff or quintet or whatever. And that was interesting to me because, you were taking something and then changing the whole cast of it, But I wouldn't like to try to simulate something that's already been done. That's boring.
On the other hand, you do like playing some of your favorite old tunes with the Rock and Soul Review.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
That's something that you've played around with for years.
Yeah, although usually, even with those, I tend to change the arrangements.
Yep.
And kind of try to expand them a little bit. But I love that old stuff, so, I grew up with early soul and R&B and Beach Boys or whatever. So they're really fun to play. I wouldn't like to do it all the time.
Yeah.
But, it's fun to go out and do that because the audience all knows all the songs. It's like a little party, so it's kind of a break,
Is that part of what got you out of the stage fright or anxiety about performing, doing those
Yeah, to an
gigs?
extent. Walter and I, took a break starting in 79 or 80. He was having a lot of drug problems and personal problems and so on. And so we decided to take a break, and eventually I met Libby Titus, who was doing these shows in restaurants. She would produce these really funny, really entertaining shows that had some comedy and music, and we both came up with the idea of this kind of rock and soul review idea, which it actually started with we were going to do one songwriter, and the first one we did was Burt Burns and Jerry Ragavoy tunes, which we did, and it was tremendous fun, and we would do it at the Lone Star when it was on 52nd Street. And we'd get people to come down because they all loved those tunes. So, we would do like Cry Baby and Stay With Me and all these old Jerry Ragavoy, A Piece of My Heart. And so we would get Cyndi Lauper to come down and Chaka Khan. And once we did a jazz night with Annie Ross. And we had a lot of fun doing that stuff. And then we had an opportunity to take it on the road. And so we I called Mike McDonald and Boz Scaggs and Chuck Jackson, Phoebe Snow, and took it on the road, and it was really fun. That's how Walter got back. The second year we did that, he was in town, and he sat in a few times, and we did a Steely Dan song, and everyone was freaking out, so we'd say, hey, why don't we try getting a new band together?
So in a sense, that's what brought the whole thing around.
Yeah. Yeah, Libby had a lot to do with it. Because at first we didn't want to do Steely Dan songs. We were just going to do these old, creaky soul. But she said, no, you're not. You can't do that. You have to play Steely Dan. The audience will kill you. They'll rush the stage and kill you. So she got us back into it. And of course, it's true that those are the ones they like the most.
Yeah. Do you think your writing as Steely Dan changed after going through that process?
Maybe to a little extent, but actually, I thought we became. It was funny. I think some of the stuff became more harmonically rich when we did our last couple albums. Like I'm always studying music, so I would study some composer for a while and then somebody else, and so I would say, wow, this is a great idea if you use this kind of chord. And harmonically, I think it became more interesting.
So who are you studying? Yeah.
In college, we studied classical stuff, but also like Stravinsky, and he was my favorite, probably. Yeah. His music it's really cut and paste music. He wasn't really that interested in development, except in a subtle way. And his music reminds me of funk music to a large degree because what he called cells, there would be like a 4-bar, 7-bar, or 8-bar cell where he would just repeat the same thing over and over, perhaps with some slight changes. And then he'd just say, I'm done with that. Here's a completely different thing. And that's how he wrote music. It's like, which reminds me a lot of, Funkadelics or Parliament or something.
It seems like over and over again, a kind of a critical and analytical approach to the stuff that you're into is like really a big part of what's happening in your life. I mean, a lot of your writing has been actually essentially cultural analysis or cultural criticism.
Yeah, I guess.
You have I
used to read a lot of critics. I used to like Irving Howe, and I used to read a lot of Norman Mailer. It's kind of New York intellectual stuff, And then in the 80s, I even got into some like deconstructionist, like Roland Barthes and stuff like that. And
but I was struck, like in Eminent Hipsters, by how much of what is ostensibly a memoir was basically your view of the stuff that was important to you.
It was like a collection of stuff. I had written some of that stuff for magazines, and I kind of expanded it for the book, except for the tour diary, which I would just every night when I was on tour, I'd just write what happened that day.
But that's why I started out by asking you what it means to you to tour today, because you were a little cranky at the end of the book.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm always a little cranky, but it depends.
Oh my God, there it was, a conversation with Donald Fagen. Can you believe it? Can you hardly stand it? Oi! We did it. We did it, y'all. We got in there. We talked about it. Thank you, Donald, for your generosity and candor during our conversation. Thank you to the boys at Storefront Music for providing a clean and well-lighted space for us to get together, get down, and get with it, as my friend the late Clyde Stubblefield used to say. Well, that's it for today. I'll be back again very shortly with another one of these deep dives, and I got to tell you that we got some good stuff coming. Stay tuned. Until then, I'll talk to you soon.